President Biden nominated Delaware Syed to be the Deputy Administrator of the SBA on March the 3rd. He's a well-qualified entrepreneur and small business advocate. After reviewing his paperwork and the ethics agreement, the committee held a hearing on Mr. Syed's nomination on April the 21st. During that hearing, Ranking Member Paul raised a series of concerns about PPP and EIDL loans received by Lumieta, the tech company for which Mr. Syed served as the CEO. After several weeks of negotiations, I brokered a compromise between the Ranking Member Paul and the SBA that provided access to Lumieta's loan applications. On June 8th, I personally sat down with Ranking Member Paul and a representative of the Small Business Administration outside the Senate chamber to review these documents and to ensure that the loans were properly attained, which they clearly were. The following day, the documents were made available to all committee members to review. The interesting thing about these loans is that they were fully able to get these forgivable loans. They got the loan, and Mr. Syed returned the money, not seeking forgiveness, because he said his company didn't need it. They were able to get their financing, and they felt it was not right to take government money when they didn't need government money, even though they would have been entitled to forgiveness, an exemplary action. Satisfied that we resolved this issue, Senator Paul agreed to my request that the committee schedule a vote to report out the nominee on June 16th. After achieving a quorum of senators, I moved to report the nomination by voice vote, a common practice in the Senate. A few Republican members asked to be recorded as voting no, which is also a common practice in the Senate. However, we were later informed by the Senate parliamentarian that the nomination could not be reported to the full Senate because a Republican staff member raised an objection that a roll call vote did not take place. A new objection was then raised based on Mr. Syed's involvement in Engage, a nonprofit organization that supports Muslim American community. One Republican office even circulated an email that focused on Mr. Syed's Muslim religion and place of birth. 2 weeks after the business meeting on June 30, I received a letter from 8 Republican members suggesting that Mr. Syed's involvement with Engage was evidence of an anti-Israel bias and support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, BDS. Mr. Syed responded to these concerns in a letter that he stated he is a proud first-generation Muslim American, but also pro-Israel. He clearly stated that he does not support the BDS movement and believes that Israel to be a major partner in supporting the growth of America's innovative small businesses. Several Jewish organizations have come to Mr. Syed's defense. For example, the American Jewish Committee wrote, "The unsupported accusation that somehow Jewish businesses or those with ties to Israel may not fare as well under Mr. Syed's leadership in the Small Business Administration has no factual grounding. Indeed, he has specifically disavowed support for the BDS movement, which seeks to dissolution of Israel. AJC rejects the charge that simply an affiliation with a group would reflect negatively on an individual, organization, or agency." The AJC went so far as to call the Republican accusation against Mr. Syed as un-American. On Thursday, July 15th, the committee again attempted to hold a business meeting to report out the nomination. All 10 Republican members boycotted the meeting, and a reporting quorum was not achieved. I must tell you, I was puzzled by that action. We had answered the questions in regards to the application for loans. The accusations of concerns about Israel or being anti-Israel had been fully resolved. So I was puzzled as to why they would not show up for a quorum. We satisfied both of their issues that they raised before calling this second voting session to report out Mr. Syed. It was not until the following day, committee Republicans changed course. This is the day after they didn't show up at the quorum, and developed a new line of attack, this time linking the nomination to PPP loans received by entities of Planned Parenthood. On July 22nd, all 10 committee members released the following statement. The SBA has wrongfully approved nearly $100 million in taxpayer-funded Paycheck Protection Program PPP loans to Planned Parenthood branches across the country. On June 30th alone, SBA approved 4 PPP loans to Planned Parenthood despite a determination from the last administration that these entities were ineligible for the program. We will not allow a vote on this nominee until the SBA takes action to recover the wrongfully acquired PPP funds by Planned Parenthood entities. Now, since receiving that, I've tried several times to hold business meetings to report out the nomination, but Republicans would not attend markups that I intended to hold on September 21st, November the 4th, and we're trying again today. On September 29th, I also attempted a discharge of Mr. Syed's nominations from the committee by unanimous consent, but the ranking member Paul objected to my request on the Senate floor. The Planned Parenthood issue predates the Syed nomination and even the Biden administration. It goes back to March 2020, when this committee took the lead in drafting the bipartisan CARES Act. It was an open process, and I particularly want to compliment Senator Shaheen, who joined me in working with Senator Rubio and Senator Collins as we sat in a room drafting the bill, line by line, going over everything that was in the bill, taking the input of all of our members. During negotiations in March of the legislation made 501c3s and veteran nonprofit organizations with up to 500 employees eligible for PPP loans. So nonprofits were eligible as long as they had less than 500 employees. During negotiations in March of 2020, then Chairman Rubio added language to an early draft that would have prohibited nonprofit entities that received Medicaid assistance from getting PPP loans. This was presumably an effort to block Planned Parenthood from getting access, but was unacceptable by many because it would also block assistance to a wide range of nonprofits such as domestic abuse centers and homes for the disabled. We rejected that. We continued to negotiate, and we were not successful. And like many issues which will remain unresolved, it was kicked up to the leadership to resolve the issue. The leadership came back with us and suggested that we should adopt a provision that would require the nonprofits to comply with an affiliation rule, and eliminated the situation in regards to Medicaid payments. We put that language in there because we thought it was right for all nonprofits to comply with a similar affiliation rule that for-profit entities need to comply with. In April 2020, SBA, under the Trump administration, released guidance on applying affiliation standards to nonprofits, which was very similar to what we do for for-profits. The part of the affiliation that applies to nonprofits relates to a common management. And this is what they said. This is what they released. And we have a copy of it here, the full statement that was issued at that time by the SBA on the affiliation rules. But it says, affiliations arise when the CEO or president of the applicant concerned or other officer, managing member, or partner who controls the management of the concern also controls the management of one or more other concerns. Affiliations also arise where a single individual concern or entity that controls the board of directors or management of one concern also controls the board of directors or management of one or more other concerns. Affiliations also arise where a single individual concern or entity controls the management of the applicant concern through a management agreement. That's what the Trump administration issued in regulations. Planned Parenthood for America determined its entities were eligible because it does not exercise control over its member organizations and does not have common management. Each member organization is its own independent, not-for-profit, tax-exempt organization with its own independent board of directors that is solely responsible for the hiring and retention of its CEO. Planned Parenthood for America does not have the power to remove CEOs or directors or its individual member organizations. This type of federated structure is common in the nonprofit world and is the reason why nonprofits such as the YMCA and Boys and Girls Clubs also qualified for PPP loans. In May of 2020, 38 Planned Parenthood entities received correspondence from Associate Administrator Bill Manger with a preliminary finding that the entities may not be in compliance with the affiliation rules. The notice, which I'm going to make part of the record, says, Notice of Investigation and Request for Records. That was what was sent to these 38 Planned Parenthood entities. This was sent in May of 2020. To my knowledge, Mr. Manger only sent letters to the Planned Parenthood entities, not to any other similarly structured nonprofit. We have later found out that there was a much larger group that had been pulled out for additional scrutiny because of concerns on affiliations. But only the Planned Parenthood received the letter from Mr. Manger about their concerns. Now, after this letter was sent out, every Planned Parenthood entity that received the correspondence in May of 2020 contested its findings. To our knowledge, the SBA did not conduct any further investigation into the matter beyond its preliminary conclusions that certain Planned Parenthood entities were ineligible. A response was made. 9 months later, the Trump administration had taken no further action against any of these entities. Now, it's interesting when you take a look at the response that was sent, and we'll make that also part of the record. It goes into great detail telling why they comply with the affiliation rules and citing chapter and verse, and ends, this is what the response from the Planned Parenthood entities say, I trust that this response resolves the matter. For 9 months, they hear nothing further from the SBA. It's also important to note that the PPP loans were not used by Planned Parenthood to provide any health services. PPP funding can only be used, as I think everyone here knows, for restricted purposes, such as payroll costs, health care benefits, paid leave, allowance for dismissal or separation, interest on mortgage, rent and utilities, interest on any prior debt existing before February 15, 2020. So it's not used for medical services. In an attempt to broker another compromise with Ranking Member Paul, I asked the SBA to provide information on PPP loans to entities of Planned Parenthood. Yesterday, I asked the Republican members to come by and we would share that information. We're prepared to make available all the information about all these loans. The information's available. Nothing's being hidden here. We'll share all the information about the first PPP loan, second PPP loans, loans that are forgiven, those that have been withdrawn. That information we're glad to make available to members of this committee. And I made that clear to the Republican members. I'm going to submit for the record a copy of the letter sent out by the SBA and the response that was done by the Planned Parenthood affiliates. I can appreciate the fact that this issue makes Republicans who oppose Planned Parenthood politically uncomfortable. But Democrats also disagree with the view of many organizations that receive PPP loans. Last December, the Washington Post reported that 14 organizations designated as hate groups by the Southern Poverty Law Center or the Anti-Defamation League received PPP loans. I'm not happy about that. But these entities are operating legally. They're qualified to receive a PPP loan, and they received their PPP loans, as every entity that was qualified was entitled to do, including the Planned Parenthood entities. It is time for this committee to get back to its bipartisan tradition. I hope that providing this information will move us forward towards that goal. I don't know what else we can do. Mr. Syed obviously is a qualified individual. He should be confirmed as a deputy administrator. We've given the SBA a lot of work to do, and we're asking for accountability. And it'd be nice to have a confirmed deputy administrator so that we can work with that person to make sure that our policies are being carried out the way we intend them to be. And we know that we've heard from a lot of our small businesses that they need to have the full complement at the SBA in order for them to get the timely help they need during this pandemic and after this pandemic. So I hope we can find a path forward, but I'm at a loss. We're prepared to make every bit of information available that we have in regards to Planned Parenthood or the way that the SBA handled these claims. What we can't do is violate the law. What we can't do is be intimidated to ask an entity to return money that they were legally entitled to receive under laws passed by the United States Congress. As I indicated when I first started, I've been informed that all of the Democrats are available to be here during this markup. I've been informed that the Republicans will not be present, so that will not give us a quorum in order to be able to report out the nomination.